Do you believe our government has made contact with intelligent extraterrestrials?
Something I can't discuss in public setting.
What is the deal with UFOs? Does your government want you to believe in aliens? Should you believe in aliens? These are questions that my guest this week thinks about a lot. She's a professor of religious studies who writes about UFO encounters as a very modern form of ancient spiritual experience. But she also seems to think that they're a little more concrete than that. Diana Walsh Pasulka, welcome to Interesting Times.
Thank you so much. Happy to be here.
So we're going to start by talking about what the UFO phenomenon is, especially as it relates to your own academic work. And we're going to get into strange lights in the sky and government conspiracies probably as we go. But I want to start where your work starts, at a more personal level, with individual experiences, encounters, abduction narratives, conversations, and so on. So you're a professor of religious studies. Why don't you talk about how religious studies led you into the UFO experience or the UFO debate?
Yeah, so I've been studying religion for many years. I study at the University of North Carolina in Wilmington. I've been a practicing Catholic for almost my entire life, and I study Catholic history. And so I've done a lot of looking into popular culture and how this forms belief about Catholic ideas like afterlife, other worlds, things like that. So I didn't believe in UFOs, had never seen close encounters of the third kind. I wasn't a person who was interested in that topic. But I was interested in the ways in which people thought of transformation, spiritual transformation, but also transformation that happens on Earth through these narratives of going into another place, another, an other world journey.
And how did that pull you into studying people who claim to have had a UFO-style encounter?
Okay, so when I was doing my work for the book about the Catholic doctrine of purgatory, that brought me to a lot of archives. And so I'd go into the archives, and archives are places where things aren't digitized, right? And so I started to look into how Catholics viewed how souls ascended into heaven or purgatory. And what I found was a lot of documentation from 1,000 years ago, 800, 500 years ago, about recorded sightings of aerial phenomena that Catholics had from Europe.
And these are things flying in the air.
Yeah, aerial phenomena. So,
Right.
they interpreted these in different ways. Here's a good example. So in the 1800s, there's this young nun, and she's living in a convent. And every night, this ball of light comes through her cell, and she's pretty upset about this. So she tells the Mother Superior, and she says, this is happening. And the Mother Superior says, you're having a bad dream. And so the nun is pretty certain this is happening, and happens nightly. And so at one point, the Mother Superior says, okay, I'm going to be with you at night to see what's going on. And they determine that this is a soul from purgatory that needs to be prayed back into purgatory. So the whole convent gets together, and they go through a process of prayers to kick this orb or this flame of light out of her cell. So these kinds of things I saw, and I started to keep track of them. Sometimes they were interpreted as flying houses. Sometimes they were interpreted as little beings, about 3 feet tall and shiny. And I shared this with a couple friends of mine, and I said, what do you all think of this? And one of them said, it looks like modern day reports of UFOs. And that shocked me. And I thought, I didn't accept it. To tell you the truth, I thought it was, hogwash. I was like, no, it can't be that. There was in town, there was a UFO conference, the Mutual UFO Network. And so I decided to check that out. And when I was there, I heard people talking about their experiences encountering UFOs, and it sounded very similar to the log I had of reports of Catholics in Europe talking about this. And so I started to do a lot more intensive work. I met academics who were studying this, And before I knew it, I was people who were a part of aerospace companies and the military began to want to correspond with me and see the data and the research that I had been doing. So that's what got me into this topic.
All right, so we're going to save the aerospace communications for a little further on in the conversation. I want to talk about the details of UFO experience, right? So when you say you went to a conference, you started talking to people who had these experiences, are we talking about sort of the classic X-Files abduction narratives where people report being taken up into spacecrafts? Are we talking about things that are sort of more sort of intimate and personal? Give me a couple examples of what we talk about when we talk about UFO encounters in the 21st century.
Okay, so the people who were at the conference had UFO encounters. And often what this entails is a person will see something in the sky, an aerial phenomena. If it's an intense encounter, they will call themselves an experiencer, or they have an experience of a being, or some kind of telepathic communication with the aerial phenomena itself. And this will shift their world, right? This will change them. And some of the people believe that they're getting special information, or they've had this experience and none of their neighbors have had this experience, so they feel kind of special about it. But the experience is a pattern match to the experiences that I saw from 500 years ago, 200 years ago.
When people report having a telepathic connection, you said they get information from, or they feel like they've gotten information from these kind of experiences. What kind of information do they get? What does that mean when people report this?
So a lot of the people would report the information as something that had to do with the future. So they would have ideas of basically like an apocalypse, a bad scenario for the future. So the people who I talked to at this conference were pretty convinced that we were, going to face some type of a cataclysm. So I talked to them a little bit about, how people have thought that for about 2,000 years. And, so it hasn't actually happened. Yeah. So it hasn't really happened like they thought that it would. So when they have these experiences and they get this information, it a lot of times makes them upset because, they're thinking that the end of the world is going to happen.
Are a lot of these people who you've talked to having what we think of as sort of the classic abduction story, where they feel like they've been taken to a different place, taken onto a ship, these kind of things? Or is it more sort of this kind of just interpersonal communication with some kind of light or being?
It's both. So the classic image of the alien abduction, you see a farmer generally, right, being abducted into a spaceship. So that's like the meme that we see. We also see a cow, right, going up into the spaceship. These are, they're ascending into a spaceship. If you were to see how souls in purgatory are shown in paintings from the 1400s, the 1500s, you'll also see them ascending into spaces, aerial spaces. So so are people experiencing journeys into other spaces, spacecraft? Are they seeing things that are, not of our reality? Yes, that's what they're having. They're having those kinds of visions, definitely.
And so one of the books that I read when, I think it was around the time that UFOs kind of came back into the news, which would have been when my own newspaper, The Times, reported on weird sightings of aerial phenomena by U.S. pilots, right? And I had not, I watched the X-Files in the 1990s. I had not been a UFO person in any meaningful sense of the term. But I got sort of sucked into reading a little bit of the literature. And one of the most persuasive books that I read was by a sort of famous UFO researcher shrouded in mystery, a guy named Jacques Vallée, right, who obviously you're familiar with. And he wrote books pretty early, I think, in the sort of modern UFO phenomena, where he connected this not just to sort of past religious experiences, but also to a whole realm of folklore, right, around, let's say, fairy abductions. And I thought Vallée's argument was quite persuasive, that there is this kind of persistent phenomena in human history that suddenly gets reinterpreted as the space age dawns in terms of creatures from other planets, but in fact is this kind of folklore substrate that just sort of takes different forms depending on the cultural context. And that seems to be a version of the argument you're making in linking modern UFO sightings to, the experience of Catholic nuns or religious mystics in the past. Right.
Yeah.
So you think that whatever we call the UFO phenomena is something that it doesn't start in 1947 with Roswell or anything like that. There's some sort of consistent historical phenomenon that's part of human religious sociology.
Yeah. So one of the first books I read when I made the turn to study UFO beliefs and practices was Jacques' Passport to Magonia, which is a great book.
One of the many great titles of books.
Yeah, it's a really great book.
In UFO literature, yes.
And to me, it really looked like a religious studies book. Here is this, by the way, he's a really interesting person who's an information scientist. So he's able to do this work on archival materials, just like I did. So Jacques links it to fairy folklore, but he also looks at the phenomena until 1860, something like that, the industrial revolution. He stops because he knows that by that time we have things in the sky that are ours. So 1947 marks a specific time period where the idea of the UFO it basically hijacks this kind of perennial idea of angels and things like that, aerial phenomena in the sky. That's not when it begins, but that's when it gets hijacked, in my opinion.
Right. That's when it becomes a narrative that is connected to ideas about space, alien life, visitors from literal other worlds, not from supernatural dimensions, and so on.
That's right.
But one thing that's been really striking to me is that, there are ways in which UFO experiences look like kind of this raw material of religion that hasn't yet been forged into any kind of fully coherent belief system. So, and I'm curious where, you're writing about this as a religious studies professor and sort of framing it in part as kind of almost the development of a very American 20th and 21st century form of religion. But it seems to be a form of religion that is completely agnostic and uncertain about what it's actually describing, right? Like people, there's people with every theory under the sun to explain what they're experiencing. So I'm curious, what are the actual beliefs of the UFO community to the extent that you can describe them? And do you think that there's a coherent religious vision, or is it just this kind of raw material where every person has a different interpretation?
Yeah, that's a great question. So what I'm suggesting, and I say this in my book, American Cosmic, is that this is a new form of religion, actually. Coherence is not going to be a feature of this religion. This is a religious development, and it's decentralized. And the reason it's decentralized, it doesn't have a pope, it doesn't have the one experiencer, although there are UFO religions and, like realism. And they come about through the 1940s to the 1960s. But then what you see when we get the internet.
Just to pause, realism was the cult, right? Remind everyone what realism was or is.
It is a UFO religion that originates with Rael. I can't remember his actual name, but he's a French man. In the 1970s, he has a UFO experience. Yep. And he's abducted, or I don't think he'd call it that because it's a pleasant experience for him.
He's enlightened.
Yeah. And so he comes back and he spreads the message, and this is now religion. It's called a new religious movement. That's how we would describe it in religious studies. One of them also is the Nation of Islam. Okay, so I can talk about both of those. These are both apocalyptic religions in that they believe that the end is soon. Okay, and that the end will come with the arrival of a spaceship. Okay,
but the spaceships are the good guys.
Yeah, in both of those religions,
in both of those faiths.
Yeah, the spaceships are the good guys. That's correct.
So they're bringing peace. They're bringing peace, enlightenment, and so on. But when we say it's a religion, do we mean that there is a kind of supernatural component, a spiritual? Are people praying to the aliens? Like what makes this different from
traditional religion?
Is it just that is the line just totally blurry, that it's like, they're acting like the spaceships are angels, but they're calling them spaceships? Like,
well, you have, an advanced being here who's, going to bring a wondrous world to these people. So it may not conform to what you consider to be a traditional religion like Catholicism, but Buddhism doesn't conform to Catholicism either. So each of those, Nation of Islam and the Raelism, these are traditional religions. Like they conform to what people in my field would call a religion.
Right.
Do they pray? Do they have practices? Yeah, they do have practices. They're different. So Nation of Islam has a completely different type of practice than the Raelism. They do specify.
Nation of Islam, just to clarify, Nation of Islam basically folds a kind of extraterrestrial narrative into a sort of Islamic style of monotheism, right? So it's sort of effectively integrating ideas about other worlds into an Islamic framework?
Yes, it does. Yes. Yeah. And it's specifically an American religion. So Islam doesn't recognize them.
Right.
So traditional Islam does not recognize them.
So those are examples where UFO experience gets basically sort of taken into or takes a traditional religious shape. There's someone who has an experience, they have a prophetic narrative, right? And there's a set of rituals and beliefs, and people subscribe to it.
That's
but then
correct. That's something of the past.
Go on and talk about the decentralized
form. So that's the religion of the past. That we're not going to see that anymore. So the internet comes along.
Why not? Wait, why not? Why are we
I'm
not
just
going
about
to see
to
that
tell
anymore?
you.
Okay, tell me. Sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, that's okay. So the internet comes along, and what it does is it creates a decentralized space. When people now see aerial objects, what do? They take their phones out and they record their experiences and they upload them to social media platforms. And so this gets then folded into different narratives. So we're not going to see a coherent traditional religious framework right now because we're in a different infrastructure. Things aren't going back. But no, we're not going to see this kind of coherent UFO narrative unless it comes from the government itself, which I think is happening.
Okay. So it's the internet that is fundamentally decentralizing.
Oh, absolutely, yes.
Because people who have these experiences can go online and see, for instance, that they're not unique, right? That there's other people who've had these kind of experiences. So that means they're less likely to think, there must be one special prophet of the UFO message, and they're more likely to
That's because there's so many prophets now, right? So many people.
So everyone is entering into this kind of ongoing conversation in which each new experience is just something to talk about and argue about.
Right. And there is, at least here in the United States, there's a give and take with the narrative that comes from DC Congress about the topic of UAP. And so that's an ongoing feature of this, what I call a religiosity. So it's a new form of religion. It is a religiosity. So it's different than traditional religions.
Okay. So I've been resisting it, but let's go towards Washington, D.C., right? Because someone I think could take up the argument you're making and say, yes, there are these experiences throughout human history and they reflect some kind of Jungian unconscious manifesting itself in dreams and hallucinations, or they reflect persistent patterns in mental illness, right, that are sort of material causes that are understandable. But I think what makes this different, as you keep suggesting, right, is that it interacts with the government, with the national security state, with people inside the government who have beliefs about UFOs and, may try and leak or make claims about UFOs and so on. But I want to stick with your biography for a minute, right? You mentioned earlier that once you started researching this subject, you started getting communications from people inside the government or inside the aerospace industry. What form did those communications take?
Correct. Okay, so when I started the research for American Cosmic, I said, okay, this is going to be pretty easy because we have the internet here and we have all of this data, and it's pretty obvious what's happening. And about a year after I started to do this, I would get emails, and oftentimes people that I knew would reach out to me and say, so-and-so got a hold of me. This is a person who works at this company. There's space-related research. And they would like to talk with you. Are you comfortable talking with them? People who emailed me, again, were from legitimate aerospace companies and were interested in seeing the research that I did about angel contact events and things like that. So then I began to share information with these people. And, I had read Jacques Vallée's books and so forth and other people's books, and I recognized that I might be identified as a person who could spread disinformation. So that was always on my mind as well as I was, working with these people. At this point, these people didn't care if I was going to ever publish anything again. They were just interested in what I had done, and they wanted to look at it. And they had actual jobs doing this work. So that was eye-opening for me.
What, without obviously betraying confidences, when you say they had jobs doing this kind of work, what does that mean? They were employed by NASA or Northrop Grumman or someone like that to research aerial phenomena? Like their
Yes.
job was
Mhm.
Director of Aerial Phenomena Research?
I
Like
mean,
what do we mean?
They
Right.
wouldn't have a title like that. So they,
Okay.
at this point, this is pre-2017 when Leslie Kane
Right.
and Blumenthal, the New York Times article.
Pre-2017,
Yeah.
again, for the audience, is when the New York Times published stories about military pilots encountering aerial phenomena, and it sort of opened an era of new debate about these things. But sorry, go on.
So yes, that's right. So this is pre-2017. This is around 2013 to about that time period. And they have, various titles. They have quote unquote day jobs as, say, a mission controller at Cape Canaveral, things like that. And they would say this, and almost all of them called it this. They said my hobby job. They would call it their hobby, and so they would. Some of them would go to places that they called crash retrieval places, and they would look for debris from UFO crashes. And then they would find scientists who would be able to look into the debris and find out if it was anomalous. So this is the type of research that they were doing. Some of them worked with astronauts, trained them, and so forth. So it was various types of people and jobs.
But their hobby jobs, as you call them, this is off the books work. The U.S. government is not paying them to do the research you're describing. They're doing it on their own.
I don't actually know that, but that's what they, implied.
That's what they mostly said. They mostly said, this is something I'm interested in because
they made a differentiation. Right. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So go on. So you had this kind of contact with them. This is all before the Times reported on these things. So how did that develop to the point where you took the idea that there's an objective reality here seriously?
Even after writing American Cosmic, I was I still was not a non-believer. And I wouldn't say I wasn't a disbeliever, but I was on, I was open to being convinced. Okay, I was open to being convinced. And there were a lot of scientists around me. I was in embedded research. Okay, so I was part of their community, and still am actually. And so, this afforded me an insight into their lives, and their lives were basically dictated by this type of study. So some of them had constrained lives. And what I mean by that is that, they had security clearances and things like that. So in a sense, they were most likely part of intelligence communities too.
And when they would reach out to you, they would send you an email? Like how
sometimes it was an introduction. So after the first few emails with certain of them, I got an introduction from an experiencer to a person who I met at a conference, which was an American Academy of Religion conference. And, so I met this person publicly, like in a public space, because, I wasn't used to talking to people like this for most of my life. And anyway, it was, I got an insight into the lives that they led. And I became convinced that the government was definitely doing something related to this. Whether or not it was actual UFOs, I honestly don't know. But I know that it's something that is definitely these people are involved in doing, and it's part of a secret program. And that was something that came out in the 2017 New York Times article.
That there's
a
secret.
These programs there's a government program studying this. U.F.O.s,
Right.
U.A.P.
Right. But the official line of all these entities has been the U.S. government doesn't have, a secret program that, for instance, has a lot of material that we think is from other planets or anything like that. Right?
Yes.
There's no
correct.
So what you're talking about is, in effect, private information. You have private reasons to think that the U.S. government effort goes beyond just collecting data and videos and trying to resolve anomalies.
I mean, this has been stated by people who are affiliated with the military. So it's not necessarily private information to me or to people who have been watching the news.
My understanding is that there's a set of people, including former Defense Department officials, various people who have said, one, consistently, there's a bunch of aerial phenomena that we don't understand, that our pilots see, that we have video of. Some of the video has been released. Some of it, as far as I can tell from my own private conversations, is classified. But that's sort of publicly stated, that there's some things we see in the sky that we don't understand. Then we have also publicly stated that, look, the U.S. government, we research this stuff. We've set up sort of dedicated groups that are researching it. But their public statements are limited to, we're trying to resolve anomalies. We don't know anything about secret programs. And then you have, starting after 2017, a set of whistleblowers or would-be whistleblowers who have come forward, who have testified before Congress, who have written books saying, actually, the U.S. government, people in the U.S. government know more about this than the public statements are letting on. There are secret programs. There are, materials held by defense contractors that people think come from other worlds, these kind of things, right? So I'm just trying to distinguish between those two layers. There's sort of
okay. So I have a
public
question.
Information
then.
is
I have a question for you. So
yes,
the people who are the whistleblowers, are these not also people who are part of our government and employed by our government?
They are.
Yeah. Okay.
Absolutely.
So what's the difference then? So we have.
Okay.
I agree,
that's fair.
Yeah. I agree with you. Well, wait. So we have. This is what's confusing, and I think we should be rightly confused here, because I believe that this confusion keeps people from wanting to do the research, because you have the government, right? You have the whistleblowers who are working for the government, and people who have written the books, like Lou Elizondo had been working for the government in one of these programs, says this is still happening. And we also have people like Tim Gallaudet, who's an rear admiral. You have Colonel Carl Nell stating that, there's no doubt that this is happening, that aliens exist, or, that this phenomena exists, and we're studying it. So you have those people coming out, and then you have another part of the government who's coming out and basically denying this. So it's very confusing to a person who wants clarity. And as for me, I try to stay out of it. So I'm not on any side. I'm watching this happen, just like you are, and just like other people are. And, I might have more insight into what's going on, because I know several of these people on both sides, both on the part where people are basically saying it's all, not real. I know those people. And I know the people who are saying that it's real. And it's definitely something that's not transparent.
It's definitely not transparent. And I think that what you just described is a good description of my own perception, that there is people who work within the government who some of themselves believe that there is a real phenomena, or related to or overlapping with that, want Americans to think there's a real phenomena. And then there is a official government narrative that, there's some weird stuff out there, but the government doesn't know any more than you or I do. So I'm trying to push through that a little bit,
Okay.
right? So I want to go back to your own story, because yes, you said you're an observer. So at a certain point in the mid-2010s, then you're talking to people connected with the government who, let's say, overlap with the kind of people, in terms of their perspectives, who came forward as whistleblowers, saying, look, there's real stuff here and the government knows it. What convinced you, because you just said you weren't a believer, implying that you became a believer, what about those conversations convinced you that you aren't just doing sort of sociology of religion here, that there is sort of actual things in the sky or wherever else that people are in touch with?
Okay, so part of it was that, and by the way, I don't advocate believing this for anyone. They have to do their own research. So I'm not advocating belief in UFOs or UAP, but definitely I became convinced that there was definitely something to this when I met so many people who interfaced with the phenomena through their jobs, and their jobs happened to take them high into the stratosphere, launching rockets into space so that they had a view of what was happening, in space. They've witnessed aerial phenomena that are not ours and that are not Russia's or China's. And when you meet, 10 of these people and they all have similar reports, it's interesting. It changes one's view. These people are not public. Okay. Some of them are, but most of them are not. They don't want to be associated with this work that they do. They don't want people to know about it. And, they're kind of everyday Americans.
So basically what we have in terms of videos of fast-moving objects is, if not the tip of an iceberg, at least a piece of a larger hidden phenomena that many people have encountered who go into the sky or into space.
That's correct. Yes.
Okay. Is there anything else that has convinced you?
Yes. I've also had insight into the counter intelligence that's against the outing of this information. And it's a rough situation here because, you have people that are out there talking about it and saying, we need to be transparent about this. This is real, like Ryan Graves, right? And then you see...
Who is one of the Navy pilots.
Yeah,
who's
one of the
become
fighter
sort of an
pilots
advocate for this.
Yeah, exactly. Yep. And then you see pushback against him, public pushback. You see even on Wikipedia, like Dr. Gary Nolan, he's at Stanford University. He studies this, and he has a foundation called the Soul Foundation, and their Wikipedia page was taken down. My own Wikipedia page was changed a bit. So, this is why I'd like to stay out of this space for the most part, because when people are talking about it in a way in which they're advocating for transparency, I see that they do get pushback.
Okay, I want to talk more about the pushback, but just on the experiences themselves. What do these, the 25 inner circle people who communicate with you, what do they think they're studying?
So there are inner circles and inner circles. So I would say that
always. Yeah.
So the people who I think have most interface with this, they don't know what it is. That's my opinion. But they think that it's very important to study because it seems to be taking an interest in us. There is another inner circle that, again, doesn't know what it is, but is able to do some, physics work and recognizes how advanced the propulsion mechanisms are. But also these people have interfaced with it enough to know that it has some trickster elements. So this is called, they have a name for it, by the way. It's called the hitchhiker effect. The idea that when a person has an experience, it often sticks to them. It's like a hitchhiker. It goes home with them. And say they have an experience and then they have sometimes poltergeist activity in their home. They might move and it moves with them. And this is something that is, to me, seems to be straight out of religious traditions, because it looks like, the tricksters of religious traditions. And some of these people are able to extract themselves from this through their own religious tradition. So this is how religion then comes back in an unexpected way to me.
So this is, for example, this would be a case of someone has one of these bizarre experiences, and then they go home, right, and they suddenly have what looks like poltergeist activity or something around their house.
Yes.
And they call their Catholic priest to say some prayers of exorcism. Is that what you're describing?
Yes.
That kind of thing.
Things like that happen, yeah.
So they bring a kind of attempt a kind of religious resolution of what starts out seeming like a science fiction issue.
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay. And are there people who have essentially, again, we were talking earlier about the concrete religions that have formed around UFOs. Are there people inside the government who you think have those kind of concrete beliefs, who are like, okay, these are angels or demons, right? If they're Christian, maybe they think they're demons, right? Or these are literal aliens from another planet who we are speaking to. Are there people who get that concrete in the inner circles you're describing?
Okay, so the people that I know are not being that concrete. However, they still experience the hitchhiker effect, and some of them know that if they, utilize the tools of their own religion, whatever that religion is, Anglicanism or Catholicism, that it seems to help the hitchhiker effect. But they also think that there's, a real phenomena that they would like to back engineer and utilize. But
real technology.
Yeah, absolutely.
Machines.
Yes,
Okay.
they believe that. They believe that.
They believe that these. So
I have not seen machines or anything like that. But I have.
You have not seen.
No.
Have you talked to people who claim they have seen machines?
Yes.
Okay, and those people are. Where do those people say they've seen the machines?
Well,
inside.
I can't say that, but I can say that I've talked to them about the machines, and they have not told me where they've seen the machines.
Okay. So this, all right. So this is.
I don't know if they've seen the machines or not, or if it's an elaborate setup where they're seeing something. So that's why I like to stay away from most of the government information about the topic. And these are people that are working for the government, with the government.
Right. Okay. So I want to pursue a kind of frustrated line of inquiry.
Okay.
Here. Right. So just a few weeks ago, the Wall Street Journal ran a couple of stories, but the first one was the most important one, that was drawing on a different set of government reports, basically, and leaks about the UFO phenomenon that emphasized the degree to which a lot of UFO material is based on deliberate disinformation. That the sort of running claim in the story was that repeatedly and consistently, the U.S. government has welcomed stories about UFOs and mysterious aerial phenomena as a cover for various high-tech national security experiments. And so one example in the story was there's cases really, but one famous case of a UFO encounter involving a nuclear facility where nuclear weapons were shut down mysteriously in association with an aerial phenomena. And the claim in the journal story was that the U.S. government was testing the effects of an electromagnetic pulse in fear that the Soviet Union would use this pulse against our facilities. And the pulse created a sort of weird experience for the people in the facility. And the government was happy to have them believe it was aliens rather than come clean about how we were testing our own defenses. So that would be one example, right? And then related to that, the piece also suggests that there's kind of like hazing and initiation rituals inside the military where people will be told, hey, we're studying UFO. No, I can't show it to you. You can never tell anyone about it. Goodbye. And this is like a prank or it's a test and so on, right? That this is part of military culture, right? So that's that story, right? You could take that story and say, okay, this kind of layering of deliberate disinformation, pranks, rumor, and so on helps explain why so many people in the U.S. government believe there are UFOs, real UFOs, right? And then you also have this sort of persistent religious spiritual phenomena that is like other religious and spiritual phenomena. It's not really amenable to study, to scientific study, right? It's amenable to sociological or religious study, right? So why shouldn't I, as a curious journalist or listeners of the show, just sort of take the Wall Street Journal narrative as normative and, say, look, if somebody really had a piece of a spaceship and you have these whistleblowers willing to talk about it, wouldn't someone actually just show us the spaceship, right?
It could be.
That
Yeah.
was a long.
Yeah.
That was a very long question. But this is. Tell me what you make of anything I've just said.
I mean, the person who wrote the Wall Street Journal article, which of course I read, seems to have a conclusion, and I don't. So there's a conclusion that no, there's nothing to see, right? And I don't think that's true. But the conclusion that there is something to see and it's an alien spacecraft is also doesn't feel right to me. So I always propose that we, and also the idea that it's a cover-up for tech absolutely could be true. But then you have to take this into context. We had this program, a government program called Project Blue Book, and it was, run by Alan Hynek. And
this is in the 1950s.
Yeah, all the way up through the 1960s. And so, with this program, there was a disinformation campaign by the government to identify people who were believers and spreading belief and basically stigmatizing them, right? And so this is something that we still have inherited. We've inherited the Project Blue Book. And then we have the Wall Street Journal article coming out. No, it's just the opposite. The government wanted you to believe in that. I mean, I'm sorry, it's just a very confusing scenario. And I choose not to pay attention to that. There's disinformation about this. I think that's the first thing people need to know, is that you're not going to get the straight story, like I said earlier, from the government. The government is telling us two different contradictory things. The story lies elsewhere, or the answer lies elsewhere.
Wait, okay, but I don't agree with that. So first,
Okay.
Where does the answer lie if it doesn't lie?
Okay, I don't know, but I'm not going to say that the answer is that there's nothing or that there's specifically this thing. Okay, so I think it's a lot more complicated.
You're saying that there is a phenomena that appears to have both spiritual and science fiction elements that is accessible in some way, not just to a crazy person in a field late at night, but to, members of the most high-tech military the world has ever seen. And it seems to overlap with people's perspectives about visitors from other planets, trickster gods, angels, demons, right? Okay, that's really interesting. But you're also saying that there are different factions within the government that have different agendas about how much people should know about this. One of those factions you're friends with by your own description. And that is the faction that, from your point of view, wants us to have a conversation like this one, right? For the New York Times, right? And my question is, if that faction, not the whole government, just that faction in the government, the kind of people you're talking to, if they have some evidence that goes beyond powerful personal anecdotes, why can't they just give it to us?
And that's where I think the Wall Street Journal actually gets it right, because most likely it has to do with something that the government needs to keep secret. And I respect that.
You think that
so there's going to be,
something that even
even
even the faction, so there's this term that people in the UFO world use called disclosure, right? Which capital D, right?
Yeah.
Which is the idea
Yeah.
that at some point you're going to have, there's secrets that the government knows that will be disclosed. Or there are people who want there to be disclosure, but this hasn't happened yet, right?
Correct.
But you're saying that even the people who are pro modified limited disclosure agree that there are things here that are so secret that they just can't reveal them?
I mean, I think that if they thought that there were national security issues, they would definitely think that we should not disclose them. Absolutely.
But then why are they coming forward and testifying before Congress, right? So there's a guy, one of the names we haven't mentioned is David Grush, who is another whistleblower who, again, had completely legitimate government credentials, both inside and also outside organizations that were doing some of these investigations. Grush came forward as a whistleblower, did the podcast rounds. He was on Joe Rogan, right, for a long conversation on Joe Rogan, testified before Congress, said a lot of really wild stuff that goes beyond the more limited
I saw,
nuance, right?
Yeah.
Said a lot of really wild stuff. And then essentially disappeared as a figure in the public eye. But if you listen to David Grush, you had the sense that David Grush and people like him want something to be revealed, if you take them seriously.
Yes,
If they
do.
want
Yeah,
something,
yeah.
no one assassinated David Grush. He was written about in the New York Times. He testified before Congress. You talked earlier about there's pushback to this stuff and it's, harsh edits and on Wikipedia pages, right? I feel like we've demonstrated in the last few years that if you want to be a UFO whistleblower, the cigarette smoking man is not going to bundle you into a car and take you away. You can go be a UFO whistleblower. And if that's true, and the whistleblowers say they want to reveal something and then it doesn't get revealed, then I default back toward the Wall Street Journal narrative where it's probably layers of disinformation concealing, top secret drone programs, which, by the way, one reason we're having this conversation, that is also a really interesting story, right? Like if it is the case that you, as a serious academic, are being made use of by people in the government who want to cover up crazy drone technology, that would be pretty interesting too. I think all the answers here are interesting. I just would like to know what they are.
Yeah, so I don't think we can have those answers. So, I'm here to study this. I've studied it. And I think that the transparency that people want from the government is not forthcoming. I'm sorry that you want that answer. I just don't think it's coming.
But I don't want transparency from the government writ large. I want the next whistleblower, who's a human being, a representative of the government, to come forward and take the further step of saying, hey, someone showed me an alien spacecraft, and by the way, it was in this base here, and Congress people can go see it. Or here is the document that I was given that persuaded me. That's what I want, and I don't think that's an unreasonable thing to ask. And again, I just think the retreat to sort of unknowability and mystery takes me back towards the, disinformation and that there's nothing truly concrete here that should convince me. What do you think is going to happen in the future?
Okay, so probably more of the same. I mean, I'm not here to try to advocate for you to believe, frankly.
Uh-huh.
So what do you think is going to happen?
I don't know. That's why I'm interviewing people who have spent a long period of time talking to people who are researching this issue. So but you're saying basically we should expect over the next 10 years, every 6 months to 2 years, someone with a national security credential comes forward with a somewhat compelling account that can't be verified of some kind of UFO encounter that the government was studying, and this will just go on.
Yeah, so we should probably
and the internet
look away.
will cycle.
Yeah,
and
we should
the
look
internet
away,
will cycle.
Ross.
We should look away.
Yeah, we should look away.
All right, good. So this will be the last public interview ever conducted about this subject, and people will just look away for the foreseeable future.
No,
you
it's not.
You think that's
okay? So about the government's response to it, that's what I'm suggesting. So my last book was Encounters, And that book basically said, why are we spending so much time paying attention to what the government has been telling us since the 1940s? People are actually having real experiences. Let's turn to them and, and talk about this. So that's what I would suggest. So, yeah, if we're going to focus here on, I can see you're very upset about that, or you're just not happy. But why do we,
I'm not. I'm
in a
never
sense,
as an interviewer. I'm never upset.
Okay.
I just have I have a persistent level of frustration with things that seem to me to be secrets that are within the capacity of human beings, journalists, and so on to uncover. If you just want to tell me that, there are weird things in the world, there are more things in heaven and earth, Ross Douthat, than are dreamt of in your philosophy, I obviously believe that, right? And I'm certainly comfortable with the idea that there are phenomena that people encounter that are not amenable to study by scientific authorities or anything like that. I'm just frustrated by the persistent claims that there's something more here that does seem amenable to revelation that I would just like to know a little bit more about.
I think you can know more about it, but you're looking in the wrong place. So I've said before, I'm separate from the government. I don't, I'm not advocating for a position. And it could very well be that what the government is doing is purposeful. So this arena of confusion that you're frustrated by, that's actually purposeful. And so they've done a good job, right? Because
they've done a good
here
job.
you are interviewing me. We could have been actually talking about, the phenomena and people's experiences of it. But we're talking about why the government is not being forthcoming. And my position is because that's not what they intend to do. Their intention is to make it confusing. And they've done a very good job of that.
Okay, so let's do two final questions. You've talked about going from being skeptical and agnostic to believing. You've talked about the apparent unknowability of what is actually going on here. You've also mentioned that you're, like me, a Roman Catholic of some sort, right? Like, if I forced you through, some truth serum developed on Alpha Centauri by aliens to make a bet on what it is, the phenomena, extraterrestrials, the supernatural, the lost civilization of Atlantis hidden beneath our seas for lo these thousands of years, what would you bet?
It's a variety of things.
It's more than one thing?
It appears to be.
Okay. Give me two examples of what that thing is. It's variety, just two different things. What is it?
It appears to be a perennial thing. So there appears to be something that interfaces with humans and has been identified in the various traditional religions. And
identified as what?
Well, I'm not going to name it because in some traditional religions, it's named in different ways. So it could be bodhisattvas, angels, demons, things like that.
Okay, so it's no, that's good. So it is intermediate intelligences between God and human beings, some of whom have our best interests at heart and some of whom don't.
And those different religious traditions have protocols for dealing with these. So, okay. So there's that.
But that was a yes. You agree. That's part of what you think it is.
I think some of the phenomena is that, not all of it. Then there appears to be some type of technology that is either, in my opinion, this is the truth serum, in my opinion, either is ours, or if it's not ours, it's amazing.
Okay. And that would, but you think it could be ours. And
yes, it could be.
In that theory, just you would have a kind of loop of, on the one hand, authentic experiences that map onto the great religious traditions, and at the same time, some kind of government cover-up or secrecy around remarkable technologies that we aren't aware of. Are those two things linked, or is it just a marriage of convenience then, that the government is happy that people have these kind of supernatural experiences because it makes it easier to cover up the amazing technology?
Yeah, that's the question I ask myself. I don't know if they're linked.
Okay. All right. So a last question, because you have been trying to pull me away from the government and back towards the personal experiences and so on. What can, nice secular readers of the New York Times who have been baffled by this conversation, let's say, take away from the personal side of it, the direct encounters that people report having?
Okay. So I think what's really important is that most of us grew up with and were educated within this worldview. And I call it the Thomas Jefferson worldview. And Thomas Jefferson didn't believe that Jesus was divine. He believed that Jesus was a really good person. And he even went so far as to rewrite the New Testament. And he took out all the references to miracles and all the things that, all the references to angels and demons and exorcisms and healings and things like that. And there was the Jeffersonian Bible. Okay. So I would say that for me, what these experiences did was I had a Jeffersonian worldview. I was a secular Catholic. Okay. What these experiences did was they jolted me out of that worldview and into the Shakespearean worldview, where, there are things that we don't understand. And why don't we understand that we don't understand them, instead of just doing like the Wall Street Journal did and just say, no, nothing to see here. Well, the world and the cosmos is a really beautiful place with a lot of mystery. So that's what I would suggest.
Okay. I endorse that take very strongly. I'm going to give you one more chance to tell me who it was who told you they had seen an alien spacecraft and where, because, it's the New York Times. It's an audience of at least dozens, if not millions. Don't you want to be the person who blew the lid off, the secret government conspiracy, Diana?
No, I don't aspire to that.
All right. Diana Walsh Pasulka, thank you for bearing with my frustrations, and thank you for this conversation.
Thank you so much.